G'day and welcome to the AustrAlien podcast. I am your host, singer-songwriter, voice actor, TJ Hollis, and with me, as always, is the voice of the people, Mr. Sean Mills. How you doing, buddy? What's the poop?
What is the poop? Well, the poop is a giant elephant in the room at the moment, which I think
Absolutely
is probably a good place to start. Because the poop is confusing. The poop is smelly, and the poop is right there for everyone to see, the entire planet to see.
And the poop is definitely dragging on an analogy right there.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, and of course, the poop is, of course, Mr. Donald Trump having just been made President-elect of the United States of America.
President-elect Trump.
President-elect Trump. This was not something that a lot of people saw happening.
No, it was not. I will give full kudos to documentary maker Michael Moore, who did say that Trump would win the primary, he would win the election, and people would be walking down the street in sackcloth and ashes, which is kind of what's happening at the moment. So, what's your thoughts, Tej? What is your thoughts?
I think that Michael Moore absolutely nailed the nail with the hammer, or with whatever tool he wanted to, because he predicted that it was all going to come down to those Rust Belt votes.
Yep.
And that was something that a lot of people weren't really paying attention to, because the obvious media narratives were, if you were watching a conservative channel, the media narrative was all on Hillary's emails and WikiLeaks. And if you were watching the liberal media, they were very much talking about Trump's votes coming from the deep south and the redneck and the racist and basically just the bigot vote.
Yep.
And which to me, I find that I found that there was still a lot of that. I also found it to be very understandable, because there's a lot of people who, just to get my own biases out of the way, everyone should know I am quite left-wing. I'm quite liberal.
Slightly right of Stalin.
Slightly right of Stalin. Ouch, that hurts me to the core, my friend. That really hurts.
That's all right. I can say I'm a I want to say conservative, but I don't, because I've got some conservative leanings. But if you want to say I'm slightly left of Hitler,
Well, I was going to say slightly right, but no, just kidding. But basically, what I'm thinking is, this was a vote by a lot of people who we in the left wing, we in the progressive wing basically left behind, that we never brought with us. We kind of all said that this sort of mindset of, bigotry, of be it, racism, be it homophobia, be it religious intolerance, be it whatever, we basically kind of had been saying for decades now that, these people are going to die off soon. And we did them a very big disservice by not bringing them along. So that allowed Trump, to really tap into that. Mm-hmm. And even then I feel kind of bad, because that's, to take Trump's policy and to take Trump's platform down to just that, I think is actually doing him a very big disservice, and is doing the American voter a very big disservice as well.
Yeah. Look, it's hard to know as an outsider where to start with the Trump phenomenon, because that's really what it is.
Absolutely.
And not having a horse in the race makes it I like to think it probably makes me a bit more impartial, makes us a bit more impartial. I think one of the fundamental problems the left, if I could use that term, but the left have made in this election particularly, is that they have lost the ability to have an intellectual debate. or to have a debate at all with the right or with people with opposing views. Because you can take some of those issues, let's talk, I'm just going to pick one at random that I know, climate change, basically because I'm picking that, not to get into a discussion about that, but because Hillary was certainly, extreme pro and Trump is extreme anti in their views. The left have lost the ability to go, okay, you don't agree with us, therefore, why don't you agree with us? What's actually the issues? Is there an issue there? Is it worth debating? Have you got a point? Is your view actually more nuanced than Trump's? As talking these Rust Belt voters, do you have a more nuanced view? Do you believe in climate change, but maybe it's not as bad as they're saying? Is there something slightly? Do you have a different take on it or anything like that? I find what I've noticed in the left and in the Hillary camp in this election it was like, well, you don't agree with us, therefore you are wrong. And that's the end of it. We're not going to argue about that. And I think that affects a lot of, as you said, those Rust Belt voters, because those Rust Belt voters are, they're working class, which...
Absolutely.
Let's just take that back a step. They're traditionally Democrat voters.
They are.
Those Rust Belt voters. And they've got... So, she lost traditional, blue-collar workers, which was...
She lost Wisconsin.
She lost Wisconsin.
How the hell does a Democrat lose Wisconsin?
That's like a Republican losing Texas,
Yes, it really is. Which
in the very early counting, I thought might have been a possibility before things turned to the right. But I feel, and it's a problem I feel it's a problem in the left, and it's not quite as bad in Australia yet, although I see the signs of it. That there's no intellectual debate on important issues anymore. There's the left have staked their claim on these 3 or 4 major topics of policy and go, this is right, so therefore everything else is completely wrong. And I think that affects people when you're told that your view doesn't matter, and we're not even going to talk about it because basically if you don't agree with us, you're wrong. I think that
you're going to die off soon.
Or you're going to die off soon, or they feel that they can't have that debate. You see that in the universities, in the colleges in America now as well.
Mm-hmm.
They have big, protests, student protests that they don't want a particular person to come in. And it's not always, but it's generally someone like an anti-climate change person or someone with a nuanced view of, feminism or something along those lines. One of those,
exactly,
tentpole left-wing issues. And
Britain, all those university students in Britain who, when Trump started to run, they all had their big protests basically asking the British government to ban him for the things he was saying about the Mexicans and the Muslims.
Yep. And so I think when you're told that you can't even debate an issue, that's going to really, basically it's going to piss off people. And they will then feel that they can't say something in public. They're going to make a point of saying it in the ballot box. No one's looking at them there. No one knows what they've done.
And it's the only place where they can guarantee that they are themselves heard.
Exactly. Now, I'm not, just to put that into context, I don't believe that's the entire reason that, Trump won and Hillary lost.
No, but that is certainly a part of it.
I think that's an important part, that I think that if the left in America want to... You got to speak to the middle. That's the basic rule of politics. You've got people on the left, you've got people on the right, but it's the people in the middle that actually swing a government of the day, one way or the other.
Absolutely.
And if you're not speaking to that middle, it's not going to work for you. And I think Trump spoke to those people. I don't, my personal view is I don't think he had many solutions, but he sure as hell pointed out the problems. And people are like, yep, I agree.
So basically, you think that part of it has come down to the fact that Trump injected some measure of popularism into what he was doing that the Democratic Party completely lost when they put Hillary up for election over someone, say, such as Bernie Sanders.
Well, I mean, I've got my personal views that I think Sanders was robbed. To be honest, I think the Democratic National Convention pretty much shoehorned Hillary into that.
I don't think that's an opinion. I think at this point that is pretty much a fact.
Mm.
And here's something that I found very interesting about that as well. They tried to do this back in 2008 as well.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to they greased all the wheels for Hillary,
yep.
just like they did this time. Everywhere they could press a thumb onto the scales of getting things done for her, they did that back in 2008 as well. And just like now, they put up people against her for the primacy, people who everyone said, who's this guy? Mm-hmm. A bunch of nobodies who weren't supposed to win. And, we saw it this time where one of these nobodies, a guy named Bernie Sanders, came out and basically all but took it from her.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw this predicted. We saw this once before in 2008 when this absolutely unknown first-term senator from Illinois named Barack Obama just took the ball straight out of her hands.
He did.
And you can trust a point guard to do that. But but that in itself should have really just said to the entire Democratic camp, wow, this woman can't do it. This woman cannot get elected. Because even if her faithful are choosing somebody who was supposed to be a fall guy over her, why, how is she going to reach anyone?
Yep. I look at the early polling for her post-election, and she didn't... I mean, we've got to remember as Australians that the Americans don't have compulsory voting, so,
Yeah.
A big chunk of their battle is just getting people out to vote. And I can tell you in Australia, there's a few unwritten rules when it comes to politics in Australia if you're on the inside. And one of them is on polling day, if people are out early on the Saturday morning, if people are lined up ready to vote, they are pissed off at the government. If they're all scrambling to vote at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because the polls close in 2 hours, they're pretty much just like, yeah, we're comfortable. Nobody ever loves the government, but not generally.
Yeah.
But that's one of the unwritten rules, and I think in America it's sort of the same, because if you've got Trump spoke to people who were pissed off, or in some people's view made them pissed off. And when you're pissed off, you want to do something about it. And if what you can do is vote, that's great. Hillary's problem, on the other hand, was she's going, I think everything's pretty all right. I'm just going to pretty much do what, the last 8 years has been. If you feel that you've missed out in the last 8 years, you're like, hell no.
Well, she was really she was an establishment candidate in what was essentially an anti-establishment election.
Do you think Sanders would have beat Trump?
I think Sanders would have given him a paddling. It wouldn't have been an absolute trouncing.
No.
But it still would have been quite a big difference in the amount of votes. I think
in the Rust Belt.
Oh, absolutely. Wisconsin, Michigan, there's two states right in
Michigan.
Right in themselves would have gone straight to Bernie Sanders, because he is exactly what they have been saying they want for decades.
Yep.
You know, and I noticed actually going through Trump's policies on his website, he makes a big point to say that he is for clean water and getting rid of lead polluted water that is going to schools. And to me, that's right there is basically all but sending a postcard to Michigan.
Well, it is, isn't it? I mean,
with all the shit that happened in Flint. Pardon my language.
Well, you know, that's crazy. For those who don't know, Flint, Michigan, there is a major environmental. I don't even know strong enough words to describe how major the environmental problems are there. But basically, lead in the water that levels of government in that place knew about, and let it happen. Lot of lead contamination. You know, I think we all know what lead does to people. So, you know, but it's basically destroyed the town, and that's another topic for another day. But, you know,
yes, that's that is another topic for another day, because that's something I'd actually really like to get into, and I don't know if we've got the time at the moment.
No. So,
because we've got these things. You know, I've got these great notes in front of me that I have spent many seconds working on over the last half an hour before we started recording this. And
in between tacos.
In between, actually, curry for me tonight.
Ooh, curry.
Curry. I have a very large soft spot for lamb korma, and that very large soft spot is called my belly.
Beautiful.
It is very accurate.
Oh my goodness.
But anyway, so we know that basically Trump won because of the Electoral College. Hillary got the popular vote, even though it wasn't by as much as it was looking during most of the actual counting.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that Trump got the Electoral College.
Yep.
And so as Australians, we don't have this.
Nope, and thank God for that.
Oh, absolutely. But for those of us who really aren't 100% aware of how it works, basically each state in America, it's recounted every 10 years. Just the population is recounted every 10 years. They're given a number of votes for that state.
Yep. And
that, and the amount of votes each state gets. Yes, based on the population. Thank you. And so those votes, once the state has kind of, has gone either Republican or Democrat, those votes then get tallied, and the first party to get to 270 votes wins the presidency. So Texas, I believe, I want to say off the top of my head, it's 42 votes.
Yeah, something like that.
I believe for Texas. But you find there are certain states that have a lot more votes than other states with lesser populations. Like Alaska has 3 votes, as an example. And quite a lot of the Midwestern states, like Colorado and that, they've only got, small amount of votes. But then you've got states such as California, New York, Texas, Florida being one of the big ones because it's such a swinging state.
Okay, so you've got the 6 biggest states are California with 55, Texas with 38, New York State, which has 29, Florida with 29, Illinois with 20, and Pennsylvania with 20.
What can happen, theoretically, is that Electoral College actually hasn't done its voting. It hasn't ratified the votes from the citizens yet. So theoretically, and I stress theoretically because it's so very not liable to happen at all, is they can turn around and vote differently from the people in their state. So a state such as Wisconsin, again, which is traditionally traditionally votes Democratic, this time has voted Republican. But the people who are in charge of the Electoral College votes, they can choose. They will have to pay a fine for doing so out of their own pockets, but they can choose to take those votes and give them to Hillary instead. It's not going to happen.
Or another candidate altogether.
Yes, or another candidate altogether, which would just be magnificent from my standpoint.
The reason we're mentioning this, of course, is that there are actually demonstrations going on in the US at the moment, as we're recording this, where people are asking, they're basically demanding, there's petitions, all that sort of thing, for these electoral college voters, so when they meet in the US Senate in December something, to change their vote and vote for Hillary.
So what do you think? How much of a chance do you think that's actually going to happen?
Zero.
Zero?
I will say that up front, zero. He has about 290 odd electoral college votes, I think. Might even be 290.
Mm-hmm.
He basically has to have 10 people, 20 of those votes change. I just can't see it happening. I can see one or two happening. On the outside chance that a big block of people go, we can't have Trump, I don't know if they're going to be willing to completely flip to the other side. Would they just write in somebody like Mike Pence?
I don't see that happening.
I think that's a much more likelihood than somebody going, well, we did vote, we did democratically and above board, this state voted Republican, but I can't in all conscience put Donald Trump down. I might have voted Hillary, but, is there a third alternative? I just can't see it happening. I think it's wishful thinking. In fact, I'll go a step further. I think these people who are protesting the vote just need to shut up at the moment, because it's just petulance. They've just completely... I understand their point about the Electoral College, because Hillary did win more of the popular vote. But Trump didn't do anything wrong. He won the election fair and square, according to the rules. The same rules that Hillary ran under.
He played within the lines.
He played within the lines. He won fair and square. So if you don't like the rules, that's fine. I actually agree with you on that. But to go out and protest basically because your candidate hasn't won, that's third world country stuff. Come on, America's better than that.
What I find is interesting is, quite obviously Trump is decrying all these people who are out there doing that. Mm-hmm. But he himself said before the election that if he didn't win, he was going to take it to Supreme Court, and that he fully encouraged his supporters to get out there and riot. If he doesn't win, he fully encouraged them to get out there and protest to make their feelings felt.
Well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with him saying that, and I think I would have exactly the same point of view. If it was the Republicans, I actually just, though, for the Democrats who are out there, protesting and stuff at the moment, they've got the extra layer of being hypocrites about it, because they're the ones who are going on about, Trump's going to be, Trump, exactly what you just said, Trump said, don't do it, and blah, 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 and, we think that's bad, naughty, naughty, But we didn't get our way, so we're going to go out and march and protest now.
I think it's don't get me wrong. I think protest in any country that has democracy, or that has the citizens' vote, I believe so very strongly in the power of protest, and I think that protest is a right that should be sacrosanct in any democratic country, such as America, such as Australia, such as Britain, such as France, Germany, wherever.
Yep.
I think protest is a sacrosanct right, and I fully support anyone who wants to get out there and protest. But in saying that, you've got to be smart about it. Protesting that he won, okay, that's not being smart about it. Going out and protesting as a way of lobbying these electoral college voters, okay, you know what? That's good. That's good, because that's still working within the system. You are still trying to use the system, and you are still making your voices heard.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a great thing. Like, I fully encourage anyone who gets out there and protests, even if it's something I don't agree with.
Fair enough.
Sorry, I get
enough.
I do get quite passionate on protesting and protesters' rights, which is why a few years ago I got so angry at the Abbott government and the Newman government in Queensland when they were trying to clamp down on protesters' rights. And it's something that I care deeply about, because I think at this point the Australian system is only just a few steps behind the American system, where, to use an analogy, you've just bought a car, right? Democracy is your car.
Mm-hmm.
You need to do maintenance. You need to change the fan belt. You need to change the spark plugs. You need to change the oil. You need the transmission fluid. You need to do all of this preventative maintenance on it. Because if you don't, that car, and the longer you leave it, the worse the damage is going to be. Eventually, that car's engine seizes, or you've warped the head gasket, or you have blown the gearbox, and you have got to throw it away and get a new one, or you've got to basically spend a ridiculous amount of money to fix this. And I think protest is one of the great bits of preventative maintenance that we have. It's one of the great ways that we can get our voices heard.
I agree with you in principle. The problem I've got is their voices have been heard, and they were said, no, we're going the other way. And that's what they're protesting.
Oh, absolutely. And that harkens back to where I said these people need to be smart about how they protest and what they protest.
Does that go back to what I said at the beginning? The left have lost the ability, in my opinion, the left have lost the ability to have an argument, to have a debate, to have a philosophical argument about something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That very much harkens back to that.
I think this is... I think this is just a prime example of it. Now, I do agree with you. I think protest, in a democratic country, peaceful protest, of course, we're talking about, but, protest in a democratic country can have amazing effects. It can change countries. Look at the Vietnam protests as an example, but. I'm just trying to see what they're aiming for with these protests. Because what they're aiming for is to overturn, in some way, whether it be legal, whether it be not, whatever, They're trying to overturn a democratic vote that was legitimately won. And that, to me, is just stupid.
I see
It's
where you're
not
coming
stupid,
from
it's
there.
petulant. It's just, I didn't get my own way. That's the sort of thing I teach my 4-year-old he shouldn't do. He didn't get his own way, so he's going to go sulk about it. That's, we haven't even got into the fact that, how many college, I saw the stuff in the news about the college lecturers, cancelling classes because they were so overcome. That is not teaching, to use that and then take it a step back. That is not teaching intellectual rigour in these students. That is not teaching them that you might be right. You might be 130% right about something, and your opponent is so completely wrong it's ridiculous. But if they think they're right, then it's your job to convince them that they're not. If it's something that is important, or if it is something that you care about. And I don't, I'm sad I lost the election. I can understand that. I've worked in politics, and I've done some work in the organisational side of politics, would be a way to put it. And it's heart-wrenching when you put your heart and soul into winning something and you lose. And I have no doubt that Hillary and her supporters were absolutely, based on all the media reports, had their guts ripped out and stamped all over the road. But
I was watching the BuzzFeed live election results, and I just purely because I thought this would be an interesting viewpoint to have. I obviously had a few other websites and Twitter feeds. Dan Carlin's especially, shout out to Dan Carlin's Common Sense, because that man is very, very interesting to listen to. Very educated man.
Absolutely.
But I was
prefer
predominantly
history,
watching.
But prefer hardcore history. But yes, I agree.
Yes, that hardcore history is absolutely
amazing.
Outstanding as well.
Yeah.
But watching the BuzzFeed live results coming through, and they kept throwing to the Democratic Party's, where they were all watching the election, and like you could hear a pin drop in the whole thing, except for when they changed to, because they would occasionally switch channels to see what every other channel was saying, and they get to something like Fox News and CNN, and you would just hear the boos coming out. But apart from that, you could hear a pin drop.
Yep.
In this gigantic hall filled with thousands of people, and you've even got the BuzzFeed reporter, which I'm putting in air quotes because wow, that was possibly one of the most unprofessional group of kids I've ever seen playing adult. But even the reporter had tears in her eyes and was just on the verge of breaking down, crying the entire time, every time she had to try and speak.
It's just a generation of people that have never been told no before.
Well, in saying that,
is that, is there some truth in that? Is there a generation of these people? And
I don't think it's. Sorry, okay. Please continue.
No, sorry, it's. I don't think it's everything. I don't think it's all of it. But is there people in these generations that have just never been told before? I told no before.
Well, you see, I don't think it's that per se. I think there's a little bit of truth to that, but it's more that, I'm 33. Mm-hmm. From my age and everybody younger than me was brought up on television shows, on movies, on this narrative of the chosen one.
Yep.
Whether it was whether it was Daniel Witwicky in the original Transformers series, whether it was Daniel San in Karate Kid, Flight of the Navigator, even through to more recent stuff like Neo in the Matrix, we have been brought up on this hugely prevalent theme of you are the chosen one. The person we are being asked to identify with is the one special person.
Yep.
The one guy who has risen above the crowd of regular jack-offs.
Yep.
And I think it's less that it's a generation of people who've never been told no, and more that it's a generation of people we've been told shoot for your dreams. Like even when our parents have said, come on, you got to grow up out of that, the rest of society has told us, no, you want to be a musician? In my case, go ahead. You go and be the best damn musician you can be. Do you want to be a video game designer? You go ahead and you make your artistic dream a reality.
Yep.
And the internet in itself, having exploded when and how it did, has absolutely given the opportunity for all of us to make a career in these creative fields, in these non-blue collar or white collar fields.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I don't know what collar, the pink collar. We'll call it the pink collar fields.
Sure.
And which are all these fields now that we're seeing our current education minister basically saying he doesn't want Hex to be providing money for anymore.
Yep.
Doesn't want any of those. If you're getting a pink collar degree, he doesn't want New Start going to you.
Who's our federal education minister, and who gives a rat's ass who he is anyway? If you're going to come out and say something like that, you don't deserve a ministry. Come on. How the hell do you... this is a guy obviously then going against what, Malcolm Turnbull, our Prime Minister, talks a lot about, the new economy and, a smarter economy. And, that's what these businesses are. That really bothers me. That really bothers me when people say don't, these things aren't important. There's an anecdotal story of Winston Churchill in the Second World War saying, it was asked, why haven't you cut funding to the arts? And he said, you know what, if we cut funding to the arts, what are we fighting for? And I don't know if that's, just one of those internet memes that, wasn't Churchill or whatever, but or whether it was real or not, but it's absolutely true.
It actually is real. I just read it in Gretchen Rubin's amazing book, 40 Ways to Look at Winston Churchill.
Fantastic. Well,
that is very much a real
even
quote
better.
that he said.
And
he himself was a painter. He
was a painter, very talented painter.
He didn't think so. A lot of other people did, but he didn't think so. He always hated that he thought he was so rubbish.
Well, he spent a lot of time... He was a perfectionist. And that's
absolutely.
That's the thing with Winston. He's a perfectionist, Interesting.
Look at us talking about Winston Churchill here. Wow, way to raise the tone of the evening. Let's there's another thing I wanted to quickly discuss here. This is a sentence that I never ever thought in my life I would ever say as a member of the as a member of the left wing.
Yep. As a watermelon.
Pauline Hanson has just put out a tweet calling for the return of Australian hero Julian Assange.
I sigh. In case the listeners didn't pick that up, that was a sigh from me. I don't even know where to start with Pauline. You know what? Pauline is a lot like Donald Trump, just in a, lot smaller way. I don't mean that as a derogatory thing either. Just, she doesn't have the power that Trump has. But Pauline, like Trump, has a kernel of truth at the middle of what she's saying. You know, or even if it's not true, a lot of people feel that it's true. So that's where her vote comes from. Pauline, like Trump, doesn't really have any answers, but asks a lot of questions and asks the right questions, I think.
Or at least asks a lot of questions that people have been quietly asking for a while.
Well, that makes them the right questions, doesn't it? Does it make her in touch with, the Rust Belt? So anyway, but I've got to just close this window of our friendly senator from South Australia. What were you saying, Assange?
Yeah, all here. Let me. I'm going to quote from her press release here. I've got this up in front of me.
One Nation have press releases. Interesting.
Yes, they do.
Sorry.
It is actually. It is. This is from a press release from Senator Pauline Hanson, One Nation Senator for Queensland, on the 10th of November 2016, titled and underlined and bolded, "Free Julian Assange."
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of this, here is a direct quote from Senator Pauline Hanson. "I hope that in the light of his great service towards freedom and truth, President-elect Donald Trump will consider granting Mr. Assange a full presidential pardon. I hope the government of Australia has taken notice and will no longer continue to assist in the shameful imprisonment of an Australian hero," end quote.
Okay, so let's
and
just
that is her quoting herself in this.
Yep. Oh, well, yeah. We can't criticise that. That is the way media releases are written.
Yes.
Because you'll find that the news organisations will just lift the quotes directly from it. So
exactly, which is why I just wanted to mention that these are legitimately 100% her words. This is literally her quoting herself in a press release that she has released. So
absolutely. So it's the gospel according to Pauline.
This is exactly what she said. And personally, I can't help but think that this has come out really only because of all the WikiLeaks stuff that came out about Hillary.
Oh, yeah. Look, where do we start with Julian Assange? Because that's a topic in itself.
Let's just say that no matter whether you think he's done the right thing or the wrong thing.
Correct, yes.
Yep. If you think he's done the right thing or the wrong thing, and I think he's done the right thing and the wrong thing, irrelevant to this conversation.
Absolutely.
What I think is the interesting thing here is that Pauline Hanson, of all people, is calling him a hero. Pauline Hanson, who, I went on to a number of Pauline Hanson of pro One Nation Party Facebook pages. I spoke to a few of my friends who vote One Nation.
Yep.
And I asked them what they thought, without saying anything about Pauline Hanson. I asked them what they thought about Julian Assange, and to a T, every single one of them said he is a traitor and basically deserves to be hung.
Yep.
And
okay,
every single one of them said he is exactly what is wrong with the left wing. And basically, I can't help but imagine that if WikiLeaks didn't, hammer home Hillary's self-destruction, that she'd be on that side, saying he should be locked up in a gulag in Antarctica and with no food.
Look, I think we've actually got to take a step back from what Pauline said here and actually just look at the facts about Julian Assange. The Americans are not imprisoning him. He is not in prison. He is in, is it the Ecuadorian?
He's in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Embassy in London, which he claimed asylum. so that the British would not extradite him to Sweden on rape charges.
Now, and in saying that, full disclosure has to be made now on that.
Yep.
Those rape charges are being held up by the Swedish government, even though both the women that made the initial claims have publicly turned around and said, no, we made that up. We were pressured into doing it. We were pressured into making those claims to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And Sweden has also turned around and said, we want him in Sweden because we can then extradite him to the USA.
Well,
now, he has not, as you said, he has not been charged with anything by the USA. He has not been charged with anything by Britain. But
I think he would be charged by the US.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you've seen what they've done to Chelsea Manning. You've seen basically how Snowden is still viewed over there.
Yep, rightly so.
See, again, that's a place where you and I will disagree.
I don't have a problem with releasing information. I have a great respect for the profession of journalism, and I have a great respect for the for the theory of the fourth estate, that it is used to hold governments to account. And sometimes you are going to get your hands on classified information, and that information is going to be released because it is going to hold a government to account. And that's the right thing to do. The wrong thing to do is to, and this is just my opinion, but the wrong thing to do is to dump troves and troves and troves of unfiltered information onto public access servers and just say, we got all this, here you go, with no concern for, I hate to use the words national security because it sounds like such a right-wing term, but there is such a thing.
There is absolutely such a thing.
And also, national security is also the lives of spies, agents, people working in sensitive fields and sensitive areas whose names are on these documents, or on some of these documents, because they have done that. That puts them in jeopardy. And a real journalist, and this is my problem with Assange, a real journalist would also act as a gatekeeper, knowing that information is going to actually damage people, and is actually going to hurt, potentially seriously hurt people, real people, and not just governments as a thing. And I think Assange looks at governments as a thing, as an overarching
power structure.
Not a collection of individuals. And sometimes those individuals do need to be called out. Absolutely no problem at all. The best WikiLeaks stuff came out when WikiLeaks took their stuff to... It was that footage of the Americans bombing something. I think it was in Afghanistan. But, the footage from the plane bombing stuff.
Yes, when they basically bombed an entire village because they thought someone was there.
Yeah, yep. And they had that footage, and they had the two-way communication between the pilot and base back in the States or whatever. That is the public's right to know. They do need to know that in a democracy. That's very important. It's holding government to account, because nobody was holding that to account. It was just the right thing to do, but they didn't release all the names of people who were involved, the lower level people who might have been involved in it peripherally or stuff like that, with the documents attached to that footage, because they took it to proper news sources. They took it to the London Times, and they took it to, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, and said, you guys act as the gatekeeper, and we'll act as the source.
I believe it was primarily also the Manchester Guardian, which coincidentally was also the newspaper that broke a lot of communist state secrets.
Yep.
Back in the 30s.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, I don't have a problem with WikiLeaks as a concept, but they're not journalists. They're a source. And I think there is still a place for real journalists and real journalistic rigour to be put to that information, for it to be verified, for the right of reply to be given to those people in authority who the information is against. And that was part of the problem, I think, with the the emails that came out that hurt Hillary during the campaign. There was no journalistic integrity in any of that. There was no journalistic rigour. There was no work done. It was basically just, here's the information. And that's not journalism. That's just data dumping on people. And part of the role of a journalist is to filter the information into a way that people can understand. It's still true and it's still honest, but it's part of a journalist's role is to get that information and compile it into a way to for people to understand, and not take it on a tangent that you might do if you didn't understand all the length and breadth of the situation. But in the world we live in today, there's very few journalists that do that. So,
well,
this
that
is
in
completely
itself,
on a tangent, mind you.
I was just about to
Pauline
make
Hanson.
a joke about speaking of taking things on a tangent.
Yep. Agreed.
But in saying that, let's jump to another tangent straight off that.
Mm-hmm.
Where you mentioned just then about there's very few journalists who are doing things correctly.
Yep.
To me, that brings to mind what I personally believe is the greatest threat to national security that we in the Western world have right now. And this is something that America has, Britain has, Australia has, again, all these Western nations. And I think this is just this quiet, tiny little thing that has somehow snowballed into being an equally silent national threat.
Yep.
And that is the media putting ratings over integrity.
Well,
like we've seen, in Australia, we have this long history of shock jocks.
absolutely.
Your Alan Joneses, and all of that ilk.
Steve
We
Price.
we have this long history of people who have an agenda of getting ratings by getting people angry.
Yep.
And, I'm not talking about what their particular political agendas are, whether they be right-wing, whether they be conservative, whether they be liberal, right-wing, left-wing, centrist, moderate, whatever. It doesn't matter what their actual political agenda is. It's their livelihood agenda of making the common Australian hate the other common Australian.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is one of the biggest threats to national security we have, because it is dividing this country. It is exactly what you were saying before about people who cannot listen to the other person's side of the story.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, about the liberal argument, the left-wing argument in colleges in America, and which of course we have it in Australia in the form of, the modern social justice warrior, the SJW as they're called. And for every one of those, we have a shock jock.
Yep.
We have that person who is a voter,
Mm-hmm.
who believes the exact opposite. Who believes that all people of a certain religion shouldn't be allowed in this country, and this country's history is of this race only, and if you're not of this race only, then you are an outsider and you need
Yep.
to 100% conform, and and that gays should not be allowed because it's unnatural, and
Yep.
all of this thing, you know,
Yeah.
all of this rhetoric. And the problem is, this has all come predominantly from these people in power, whether they be the shock jocks, whether they be, and I'm going to say Jermaine Greer. Jermaine Greer on the left is a very big case of this, and I'm all for gender equality.
Yep.
But Jermaine Greer is one of these people who is not listening,
Wow.
who is not acknowledging another side to, and we're never going to get a gender equality if we can't speak to and listen to the male side of the situation.
Because no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. I think the difference is that, to go to the point of journalism, that there's not. This is something, obviously journalism is actually very important to me and very, something I believe in.
Well, you were studying journalism right at the moment, are you not?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. Yep. So I'm studying a journalism degree at the moment. So, as a side issue to everything else I do,
For anyone unaware, Sean is a game developer with this fantastic multinational company called Infamous Quests, and I was very lucky enough to get to do some voice acting and some singing on their first major release, which was Quest for Infamy, available now on Steam and GOG. You should go check it out. It's a fantastic point-and-click adventure.
So the thing with journalism is there's a perception of what a journalist is, and there's what a journalist should be. And
idealism.
And what a journalist should be, there's not too many of them out there anymore. In Australia, John Pilger is probably one that I can think of. Ray
Martin used to be.
Ray Martin, Jana Van, or any of those 60-minute reporters from when 60 Minutes first started.
From back when it wasn't just sensationalist rubbish.
They actually, investigated things. Something Pilger said once is that embodied in journalism are basic freedoms. The freedom of speech, the right to know, and without that power and that information, there can be no participation in what we call democracy. Now, Pilger for those who don't know who John Pilger is, look up his stuff on the internet, do a Google, have a look. He covered a lot of. He was one of the main written journalists in Australia that covered the Vietnam War. Covered a lot of the civil and domestic upheavals in the States in the 60s and 70s. Was in Cambodia after Pol Pot's reign. Went undercover in East Timor during the Indonesian occupation back in the mid-70s. So, does a lot of documentary work and stuff like that. So, that is journalism. That is, getting information to people and showing people things that they need to know. Whereas a lot of journalism, in quotation marks, nowadays is about, showing people what they want. And sometimes what people need and what they want are different things. People want to be amused. In my view, people want to be amused by politics in this country. I really do believe that a lot of the media think that. It's a game. We'll build someone up while pulling the other person down, then we'll build someone else up to pull that person down. We've seen it over and over and over. I mean, for all of the other issues that were involved, and, TJ and I will disagree on some of this stuff, but for all of the other issues involved, the media had a very, very big say in the rise of Kevin Rudd as Prime Minister in 2007, and then his fall from grace, and Gillard's rise, and her fall, and then Rudd's re-rise, and his fall, and Abbott's rise and fall, and rise and fall, and fall. And,
And fall.
you know, you look at Malcolm Turnbull, our Prime Minister at the moment, was the media darling when he was the outsider, because that was a great narrative. It was interesting to tell people. But as soon as he got into the top job, anyone with a basic fundamental, not even fundamental, just a basic, very basic, broad understanding of politics and the conservative parties in this country know that the Prime Minister is not a god. He is not... he's a leader, but he's he's the first among equals, or she, but, he's the first among equals. He doesn't design every policy position of a government. Kevin Rudd didn't do it, Julia Gillard didn't do it, and Malcolm Turnbull's not doing it. So
Kevin Rudd tried to, because he was quite the micromanager.
Because he was a megalomaniac, but...
Yes.
So you might be able to see my bent on political figures here, but
look, it matches quite well with my political bent, which I think there's basically both major parties are broken right now.
I think just to keep it into the not that I disagree with that, but just to keep it into the context of the media influence on that, though. They're so scared of doing something wrong that they're not doing anything.
And that in itself is doing something wrong.
Which in itself is doing something wrong. Let's go back to, cast our minds back to when Tony Abbott won government on quite a substantial majority. So, had quite a lot of Australia, more of Australia voted for Tony Abbott than any of the other parties combined. So, or, the coalition. But that first budget, which was horrifically received, there was no... Again, this goes right back to my point at the beginning. There was no discussion about any of it. There was no intellectual rigour put to any of that by the media, by the opposition, by anyone. It was... This is bad, can't do any of it. Abbott did identify some issues that are important and need to be addressed. But, so one of those issues, for example, is the funding for our university sector is unsustainable in the long term without a change or, without something happening. We're simply not going to have enough money to fund it. Now, that's a big issue because, free tertiary education is very important,
Absolutely.
And it's very important, it's a pillar of the Labor Party, they hang, Gough Whitlam's, halo around that. So there was no debate over that issue. We don't even look at the issue. We just said, what Abbott said is wrong. That's the end of it, and that's where the media should have been going to the opposition. Okay, Mr. Shorten, you disagree with what Mr. Abbott's doing. Do you agree that there's a problem? Or, well, we've done some research and we've looked into it, and his projections are probably pretty accurate in this regard. It's not going to be sustainable, so what's your solution? But there is none of that. It's like, where's Bill Shorten's soundbite to say that Tony Abbott's wrong and he's... I can't even remember the slogans that he would have used, but, there would have been, as we called, 3-word slogans saying that it was bad. And years later, I can remember some of those 3-word slogans. It's been happening forever. The Howard government was called mean and tricky before the 04 election, or the 01 election, around there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
These 3-word slogans do resonate, but they don't get to the core of the issue. They don't actually address any problems. And that's the problem with the media at the moment. There is no one like Pilger. There's no one like, Kate Adie from the BBC. She is. I will hang my flag on this straight away. My absolute pinnacle of a journalist. Absolutely love her work.
Wow.
Get onto YouTube, watch some of her stuff. Unbelievable.
That is big words. That is.
She was in Tiananmen Square when the protests happened, and when the Chinese, she was standing amongst the protesters when the Chinese army opened fire and had, people shot and die right next to her while she's reporting. And the footage is on YouTube. You can actually watch it. It is the most gut-wrenching thing, but it showed the world what was really happening, and that's what should be done. And that's obviously different than, funding for universities, but it's all important, It's all important to people. So, anyway, that's my tangent.
No. It's I very much respect what you have to say there, because I agree with you. I think, and to be honest, I was discussing this at work last night. I was discussing the fact that I was starting a podcast about politics, about current affairs, about world affairs, and I got asked why. And this is why.
Yep.
This is why, because I feel that right now that the Australian media is doing the Australian citizen a disservice.
Absolutely.
I think that the media is doing us bad. They're doing us wrong. They're not taking us seriously. They're aiming for the lowest common denominator.
They're selling us a lemon.
But then assuming that the lowest common denominator is 30 IQ points less than what it is.
And also, this is exactly why, with no disparagement of Donald Trump, but this is exactly why Donald Trump won. Because the media in the US predominantly is very left-wing and had their narrative, and that's all it was. And everything they reported went to that narrative. It didn't go to the truth. It didn't go to the facts.
I don't know. I don't 100% know if that's correct. I think that here in Australia, we get the left-wing media. We get the US left-wing media narrative.
Yep.
Because
absolutely.
there is still a lot of stations in the US, a lot of media in the US who is just as powerful, who are pushing that right-wing media as well.
Well, and, I guess I'm talking on
Fox. Fox News.
I guess I'm talking on a national level, and in that respect, I think there's only Fox. I think in your regional markets, yes, I think there's a lot more conservative conservative media, but I think on a national level, in the States, Fox is your biggest.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I see CNN, CBS, your New York, I subscribe to some newspapers. I get the New York Times, I get the Wall Street Journal and all them, and I find them very left-wing. So,
well, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have traditionally been quite left-wing, even going back to, the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Yep.
When, when all that issue was happening with the Cuban independence and, the American Spanish War in Cuba.
Yep.
Like they were, even going back then, they were very left-wing. They were traditionally a voice of what they considered to be freedom. Anyway, we are coming up to about an hour 20 by my count at the moment.
Sure.
And there's still a lot of things I'd like to discuss, but I think they're going to have to wait for a future episode. I just want to say a big thank you again to Sean for helping me with this, for co-hosting this glorious.
Mate, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, I've had an absolute ball, and
Always fun.
this is exactly what I wanted this podcast to be, and I really appreciate you coming with us. I really want to thank everybody who took the time to listen to it, even if you got maybe 5 minutes and went, nope. At least thank you for giving this a shot.
If they got 5 minutes and nope, they're probably not listening to this section of it.
I know, but still. But still.
Thank you anyway.
But absolutely thank you anyway. I want to say thank you to anybody who's, this isn't the first of our podcasts that you've listened to, and I would like to ask you very nicely if I could please have your secrets for time travel, because I'd like to know the Super Bowl result.
Absolutely.
And not purely for betting purposes.
Quite a few results would be nice to know.
Absolutely.
And
if you
for
could
me,
bring me back,
it's purely for betting reasons. Absolutely
Fantastic.
for betting reasons. Oh, jeez, I could do with more money. That's basically what I'm saying. I want more money.
I think we all could. So, I'll be setting up a... No, sorry, please go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I would also like to say if you have anything you would like us to discuss, if you want to know our opinions on things, please let us know in the comments on YouTube, where this will be, and anywhere else, all our electronic media. Let us know. We are all about what you want to listen to, because that's important to us.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what I was about to say. I'll be setting up a Facebook page for us very, very soon in the next few days. Yep. And by the time that you're able to listen to this, it should be up and running. Once again, thank you very much for sticking with us. I'm TJ. This is Sean. We are the AustrAlien podcast,